Evan was the kind of trainer people trusted too easily. He listened, remembered details, made clients feel seen. That's how Vanessa pulled him in. She wasn't just married, she was married to a man who owned half the city's real estate. But money didn't stop her from showing up every morning, looking for something she'd already decided Evan would give her. What started as flirtation turned into an affair that felt thrilling and dangerous. Then her husband signed up for personal training too. And from that day, every workout felt like a trap waiting to close. Evan arrived at the gym before sunrise, unlocking the glass doors to the quiet smell of disinfectant and sweat. It was his ritual, his sense of control before the chaos of clients and gossip began. The city outside hadn't yet woken, but inside the mirrors reflected his image back, fit, confident, pretending he had it all figured out. He always said the gym saved him, though he never explained from what. He trained people to transform their bodies, not realizing how easily someone could reshape his entire life in return. That person would be Vanessa. The first morning Vanessa walked in, heads turned. She wore expensive workout gear that didn't belong in this part of town, and her perfume stayed in the air long after she passed. She smiled at Evan like she'd already decided he was the one she wanted to train her. Her gold wedding ring glinted each time she adjusted her ponytail, but she didn't mention her husband. When Evan took her form through the first session, she laughed easily, asked too many personal questions, and left saying she'd book him privately. He pretended it was just business. Private sessions turned into longer ones. She started bringing his favorite protein shakes, somehow always remembering the flavor. She told him she liked his focus, that he wasn't like other trainers. He liked how she looked at him, like he mattered beyond the gym walls. He started timing his schedule around her, turning down other clients if her slot was open. Every compliment from her made him feel seen, not realizing she was slowly learning exactly what to say to keep him hooked. She made him feel special, but what she really needed was control. Vanessa talked about her husband only in pieces. Late nights, arguments about money, the loneliness of being married to someone powerful but emotionally gone. Evan told himself he was just listening, being supportive, the way trainers do. But he started craving those stories, needing to be the one she confided in. When she laughed, it felt like a win. When she cried, it felt like purpose. He told himself she was safe with him, that what they had wasn't wrong because it wasn't physical yet. Deep down, he knew that boundary wouldn't last much longer. Evan started noticing changes in himself. He stayed later at the gym, replaying her words in his head. He caught himself imagining her outside those mirrored walls in restaurants, in bed, in his life. He knew it was dangerous, but it didn't feel that way. It felt alive. The more she shared, the more he believed her life was missing something he could provide. He began to think he was saving her from a loveless marriage, unaware she was the one rewriting the story from the start. He just didn't see how much she was enjoying it. When Vanessa missed a session one morning, Evan felt irritated. He paced around checking his phone, telling himself clients cancel all the time. But when she arrived the next day with coffee and an apology, his frustration melted instantly. She placed the cup in his hand and said she'd thought of him. That was enough. He didn't see the way she smiled afterward, relieved, satisfied, like she'd confirmed her hold on him. By the end of the workout, she was touching his arm longer than needed. He didn't stop her. He didn't want to. It started small. Her hand brushing against his as he adjusted her posture, her gaze holding his a bit too long in the mirror. Then came the late-night messages about nutrition plans that weren't about food at all. Evan told himself it was harmless flirting, something temporary. But when she sent a photo from her home gym wearing his favorite color, the line between client and lover vanished in his mind. He replied instantly, knowing he shouldn't. What began as advice on fitness turned into something far heavier, something neither could easily walk away from. Evan's phone became his addiction. Every vibration, every late-night message pulled him in deeper. Vanessa sent photos of her dinners, her view, her bruised emotions. She said she felt trapped. He promised she wasn't alone. He didn't realize how much time he spent waiting. Waiting for her name to light up his screen. Waiting for her attention to return. He ignored his own relationships. Skipped family calls and stopped meeting friends after work. The gym, once his escape, became just another room where he watched the clock, counting down to her next message. At first, he thought he was in control. She was the married one taking the risk. The one who could lose everything. But she made him feel like the decision was his, to keep things secret, to protect her. When she said she trusted him completely, something in him shifted. He stopped seeing the danger, started seeing purpose. He liked the power of being the man she turned to when her husband didn't notice she was gone. But what he didn't see was how carefully she was feeding his ego, using affection like a leash. One afternoon, Vanessa arrived late, carrying a small box wrapped neatly in silver paper. She said it was just a thank you for helping her stay consistent. Inside was a jar of imported honey with a gold lid. She said it reminded her of him. Sweet, but strong. Evan laughed it off, but he kept it in his locker instead of taking it home. It felt personal, like a secret gift meant only for them. He didn't know then that the honey would matter later, that it wasn't just sweetness she had sealed inside that jar. The jar sat there for weeks, untouched, becoming a symbol he couldn't explain. Every time he saw it, he remembered the way she said his name. His co-workers teased him for being distracted, but he brushed it off. He began training her even on his days off, saying she needed a specialized plan. What he didn't say was that her sessions had become his favorite part of the week. Vanessa had a way of making the world smaller, just the two of them, sweating, laughing, pretending they weren't destroying something that couldn't be rebuilt. Another trainer, Marcus, noticed the shift. He joked about Evan's VIP client and warned him not to get too close. Evan laughed it off, pretending he was fine, but Marcus's tone stayed serious. He'd seen it before, clients with money and boredom looking for trouble. Evan brushed off the warning, saying Vanessa was different, but later that night he caught himself scrolling through her social media, memorizing every caption, every smile. He didn't want to admit it, but Marcus was right about one thing: Vanessa wasn't just working out her body, she was testing his limits. Vanessa began canceling sessions unpredictably, texting last minute with vague excuses. Then she'd show up 2 hours later, smiling like nothing happened. Evan acted calm, but the inconsistency gnawed at him. He wondered who she was with during those missed hours. His temper started slipping into his workouts. When she finally explained she'd been busy with charity meetings, he believed her. He wanted to. The next day she showed up wearing the same perfume as always, but something about her felt off, like she was daring him to ask questions he wasn't ready to ask. That week, Evan noticed her scrolling through her phone during breaks, texting rapidly with someone else. He didn't say anything, but his mind kept looping. Who was she talking to? When he asked lightly if it was her husband, she smiled and said, "Sometimes." The answer twisted something in him. He told himself he had no right to care, but the thought wouldn't leave him. Later, when she mentioned her husband's new real estate project downtown, he started Googling him, curious about the man behind the money. That curiosity would soon become something much darker. A few days later, Evan was scrolling through fitness news when he saw it, a headline about Richard Harlow, real estate magnate, buying the very gym he worked at. The photo showed Richard shaking hands with the owner, Vanessa beside him, smiling. Evan stared at the screen, realizing she never mentioned it. The timing wasn't coincidence. He felt cold but said nothing. The next day when she came in, she greeted him casually, like the photo didn't exist. And in that moment, Evan understood. He wasn't her secret anymore. He was part of something much bigger. Evan kept his reaction hidden when Vanessa walked in the next morning. She chatted like everything was normal, pretending the news article didn't exist. He matched her calm tone, guiding her through stretches, but every word felt rehearsed. When she mentioned her husband might stop by sometime, he forced a laugh. It was the first time he felt afraid of her charm, realizing it wasn't warmth, it was strategy. She looked him in the eye and said, "Don't worry, he doesn't care about the gym." But Evan couldn't shake the thought that maybe she was wrong. Later that week, Vanessa laughed about the photo, saying it was just business. She insisted her husband invested in everything, never paying attention to details. But her eyes flickered when she said it. Evan nodded, pretending not to notice the shift. That night he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, wondering what game she was really playing. The thought crossed his mind that maybe he was being used, but he dismissed it almost instantly. The way she looked at him earlier, soft, familiar, still had power. He clung to that look like it was proof of something real. The gym started feeling crowded with strangers. Men in suits standing by the windows claiming to be consultants. They didn't train, they watched. One of them followed Evan to the locker room, pretending to ask about memberships. Evan brushed it off, but his instincts told him they weren't there for fitness advice. When he mentioned it to Vanessa, she smiled faintly and said he was being paranoid. Still, he noticed her checking her phone more often, whispering during calls. That was when Evan realized he wasn't imagining it. Someone was watching them, and she knew exactly who. One night, Evan stepped onto his balcony for air and heard a faint mechanical buzz above him. Looking up, he spotted a small drone, hovering, blinking red. He waved, thinking it belonged to some kid, but it didn't move. It just hovered, focused on him. After a minute, it zipped off into the dark. He tried to forget it, convincing himself it was nothing. But when he turned off the lights inside, he could still see faint red reflections through the window, like a reminder that privacy had already left his life behind. The next morning, Vanessa joked about surveillance as if reading his mind. "People like Richard always want control," she said. Evan laughed weakly but felt his stomach knot. She didn't ask about the drone, she didn't need to. Later that day, he noticed one of Richard's associates lingering by the front desk, talking quietly to the manager. He tried to focus on his clients, but his mind kept circling back. If Richard suspected anything, why hadn't he confronted them yet? It almost felt worse that he hadn't, like he was letting the trap tighten on its own. Vanessa started choosing stranger meeting spots. Once, she asked him to meet at a closed parking lot behind a shopping center. She said she just wanted to talk freely. Her tone was calm, but her hands trembled as she scrolled through her phone. She claimed Richard had a tracker on her car, and that someone was following her. Evan believed her, even offered to help. She thanked him, kissed his cheek, and told him to trust her. The words stuck in his head. She didn't say she trusted him. She said he should trust her. Evan's work began to slip. He forgot appointments, showed up late, and snapped at clients for small things. Rumors spread that he was distracted by a rich woman. Marcus noticed and tried to talk to him again, but Evan brushed it off. Vanessa had become his center of gravity, and everything else felt irrelevant. Still, his pay was reduced that month, and management warned him to get his act together. When Vanessa found out, she promised she'd make things right. Evan didn't ask how. He just wanted to believe she could fix everything, even his mistakes. Vanessa began hinting at leaving her husband. She said she couldn't take the constant control, the fake smiles at charity events, the quiet threats when she spoke out of line. Evan told her she deserved better. She smiled sadly, saying she only needed proof to walk away. When he asked what kind, she said it had to be something that would ruin Richard's reputation completely. Evan felt uneasy but didn't show it. He wanted to protect her, but part of him knew if she was willing to ruin her husband, she could ruin anyone. A week later, she showed up wearing sunglasses indoors, claiming she'd been in an argument with Richard. She asked Evan if he trusted her. He said yes before thinking. That's when she asked him to do something reckless. Get access to Richard's office at the gym to find documents about his secret deals. Evan hesitated, but she pressed his hand against her cheek, whispering that it was their way out. He agreed, convincing himself it was love. But the truth was, it wasn't love driving him anymore. It was obsession disguised as loyalty. That night, Evan waited until the gym was empty. He swiped his keycard and slipped into Richard's office. The smell of new paint and cologne filled the air. He moved fast, opening drawers, scanning papers. He found contracts, receipts, and one folder labeled Private Clients. As he pulled it open, the screen on the wall flickered to life, a motion alarm. His pulse jumped. He dropped the papers, rushing out the back door. The security light followed him as he ran into the alley, heart pounding with a realization. Vanessa's proof might cost him everything. Evan spent the night pacing, waiting for a message from Vanessa that never came. The next morning she acted normal, laughing during warm-ups like nothing happened. When he tried to bring up the break-in, she brushed it off, saying she'd handle it. He wanted to demand answers, but her calm made him doubt his own fear. She had a way of making him feel foolish for worrying. Still, when Richard appeared at the gym later that afternoon, Evan froze. Richard shook his hand firmly, thanked him for the good work, and scheduled a training session. Evan couldn't refuse. Richard's handshake was cold, his smile measured. He said he wanted to get in shape for a new chapter. The words felt heavy. Vanessa avoided eye contact the entire time Richard was around. Evan went through the motions of training him, pretending it was just another client, but his thoughts were racing. Every question Richard asked about his background, his hours, his clients felt like a test. When the session ended, Richard clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You keep things professional, right?" Evan nodded, though his throat felt dry. That night, Vanessa texted him saying Richard was getting suspicious. She said she had to cool things off publicly but promised they'd fix everything soon. Evan didn't like the sudden distance, but he agreed. For the next few days she ignored his messages. Each unread text made him more desperate. He started thinking maybe Richard's friendliness wasn't friendliness at all. Maybe it was the beginning of something else. The silence between them grew heavier than any conversation they'd had before. Evan began to understand what obsession really felt like: lonely, endless, and consuming. When Vanessa finally messaged again, it was short. "We need to talk." She sent an address: an empty lot near the river. Evan arrived early, waiting in his car. She showed up in dark glasses and a trench coat, like she was hiding from someone. She said Richard knew everything, that they were being followed. Her fear seemed real. Evan offered to go to the police, but she snapped, saying that would destroy both of them. Instead, she said she had a plan. He didn't ask what it was. He just wanted her to feel safe with him again. Back at his apartment, Evan noticed a faint buzzing outside the window. The same drone hovered again, closer this time. He picked up a broom and swung, hitting it. The drone crashed onto his balcony, sparking slightly. Inside, he found a small memory card taped beneath its shell. When he plugged it into his laptop, dozens of images appeared, photos of him and Vanessa together in parking lots, at the gym, in his apartment. Every secret moment was documented. He felt sick. Someone had been watching all along, and whoever it was, they weren't guessing, they knew everything. Evan didn't sleep that night. He locked every door and window, pacing the apartment with his phone in hand. Around 3 a.m., Vanessa called. She was crying, saying Richard had discovered the affair. She begged him to meet her in person. Against every instinct, he agreed. When she arrived, her hands were shaking, her eyes red. She said everything was falling apart, that she needed him to stay calm. She promised she'd fix it. He believed her because he had to. She spent the night on his couch, pretending to sleep while he sat awake, staring at her. The next morning, Evan woke to news alerts on his phone. A man had been found dead in a car near the gym parking lot, identified as Richard's security chief. The article said he'd been shot, though no suspects were named. Evan's stomach turned. He remembered the night of the break-in, how quickly Vanessa dismissed his fear. Now someone connected to Richard was dead, and Vanessa was gone again. He called her repeatedly, but she didn't answer. The honey jar still sat on his counter, untouched, and for the first time, it looked more like evidence than affection. Hours later, the gym manager called Evan into his office. 2 plainclothes officers stood inside. asking questions about Vanessa and Richard. Evan tried to stay calm, saying he only knew them professionally. The officers exchanged glances but didn't push further. When they left, the manager warned Evan to stay out of trouble. Word was spreading, rumors about affairs, blackmail, and now murder. Evan walked out of the gym feeling like every set of eyes was on him. For the first time he realized how small the world had become and how quickly it could turn against him. That night Vanessa finally texted. Her message read, "If anything happens, remember the honey." Evan stared at it, confused. He unscrewed the jar's lid for the first time and saw something glint inside. Carefully he poured out the honey and found a tiny USB drive wrapped in plastic at the bottom. He plugged it into his laptop, heart pounding. The files contained recordings of Richard's business meetings, corruption, hidden accounts, even threats against partners. Vanessa hadn't been collecting love. She'd been collecting leverage. Evan sat frozen, realizing he wasn't her secret. He was her scapegoat. He drove to her mansion that night, demanding answers. The gates were open, lights on, but the place felt hollow. When she finally appeared at the top of the stairs, she looked calm, almost serene. She admitted everything. She'd been recording Richard for months, building a case to protect herself. Evan begged her to come clean, but she smiled, saying she already had what she needed. Then she kissed him goodbye, whispering that she'd fix it before disappearing into the house. Evan stood there for a long time, realizing he had no idea which side she was really on. When he returned home, the apartment door was slightly open. Inside, nothing seemed stolen, but the honey jar was gone. His laptop sat closed, though he was sure he'd left it on. He searched the rooms, whispering her name, but the silence felt heavier than any answer. He checked the hallway cameras, offline. Someone had been there, someone who knew exactly what to take and what to leave behind. He sat on the couch until morning, realizing the only proof he had of the truth was gone, and with it, any chance of explaining himself. The next day, Richard canceled his gym membership. No explanation. The front desk said he was handling private matters. Evan's nerves frayed. He imagined every headline, every accusation. He checked Vanessa's social media, but all her profiles were wiped clean. Even her photos with Richard vanished. It was as if she'd been erased overnight. Marcus asked if he was okay, but Evan barely heard him. The gym that once felt like home now felt hostile. Each reflection in the mirrors looked like a stranger pretending to hold his life together while it quietly slipped apart. Evan's car was towed without warning. When he called the impound lot, they said no record existed. Later he received a message from an unknown number. "Stay away from her." He stared at the text for a long time, trying to decide whether to delete it or reply. He chose neither. The words hung in his mind like a sentence he couldn't unhear. When he walked to the gym the next morning, the same car from before, the one with tinted windows, was parked across the street. It didn't move when he passed. It just waited. Police visited the gym again, this time asking about a missing USB device. Evan's chest tightened, but he denied everything. They thanked him and left, but their tone suggested they'd be back. After they were gone, the manager told him to take a few days off. It sounded less like concern and more like suspension. That night, Evan checked Vanessa's mansion again, but the place was empty. The lawn was overgrown, windows dark. He sat in his car outside, replaying every decision that brought him here. Somewhere between love and loyalty, he'd lost both. At home, Evan tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't stop replaying her voice. He walked to the window and saw faint headlights flash against his wall, then fade. Maybe it was a car passing by, or maybe someone watching. On his kitchen table lay the broken drone, its lens cracked, still blinking faintly. He thought about throwing it out, but couldn't. It felt like proof of everything and nothing at once. When his phone buzzed again, he didn't look. He already knew whose name he'd see on the screen. He just couldn't face it yet. The next morning, Evan tried pretending life was normal. He trained clients, smiled at jokes, and ignored the whispers that followed him around the gym. But when he looked in the mirror, he saw someone else: tired eyes, nervous hands, and a constant twitch in his jaw. Vanessa's absence made everything louder. The music, the weights, the chatter. He thought about calling her again but stopped himself. Each unanswered ring felt like proof that she was done with him. What he didn't know was that she wasn't gone. She was simply waiting for the right moment to reappear. That night, Evan sat at his kitchen table staring at his laptop. The photos from the drone still filled the screen. Every kiss, every meeting, every lie. He wondered who had taken them. Maybe Richard. Maybe Vanessa herself. He almost deleted them but stopped. Something told him he might need proof one day. He transferred them to a flash drive and hid it inside his shoe. He didn't know what to do next, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, it wasn't just an affair anymore. It had turned into something with consequences he couldn't control. Evan woke up to a call from an unknown number. A man's voice said his name, paused, then hung up. No other sound, no message. When he called back, the line was disconnected. He spent the morning watching the parking lot from his balcony, half expecting to see the black car again. It never came, but the waiting became its own kind of punishment. Each hour stretched thin with doubt. He started thinking about leaving the city, but something, maybe curiosity, maybe pride, kept him frozen in place. He couldn't walk away without knowing how deep it went. Later that day, a small envelope slid under his apartment door. Inside was a single photo, him and Vanessa in his kitchen, laughing. On the back, someone had written, "You were warned." His hands trembled as he tore the paper in half, but the message stayed burned in his mind. He threw the pieces in the trash, but even that felt like being watched. Every sound in the apartment made him flinch. The fridge humming, the clock ticking. He began to realize that whoever was behind this wanted him paranoid, and it was starting to work. 2 days passed before Vanessa contacted him again. She sent a voice message, whispering that everything was under control. She told him to stay quiet, to act normal, and that she'd explain soon. Her tone was calm, too calm. Evan replayed the message several times, trying to find emotion in her words. There was none. She sounded detached, almost rehearsed. He wanted to trust her, but deep down, something had shifted. Love used to feel like safety, but now it sounded like instructions from someone who didn't care if he survived the mess she made. The police showed up again, asking Evan to visit the station for routine questioning. He went, nervous but cooperative. They asked about Vanessa, her visits, and whether she'd ever mentioned her husband's business. Evan denied everything, though his voice betrayed him. When they let him go, he noticed one detective watching him closely, scribbling notes as he left. Outside, the air felt thick with suspicion. He started realizing he wasn't just being watched, he was being studied. Every choice he made was being recorded somewhere, and Vanessa's fingerprints were all over it. She had planned everything too well. That evening, Evan returned to his apartment to find a plain white envelope on his table. No name, no address, no sign of forced entry. Inside was a single sentence written on printer paper. "Check the honey." His stomach dropped. The jar had been gone for days. He searched every cabinet, every drawer, but it wasn't there. When he finally stopped, breath heavy, he noticed a faint sticky ring on the counter where the jar used to sit. Whoever left the note had been inside again. He leaned against the wall, realizing he was completely trapped in her game. Sleep became impossible. Evan started hearing things, a knock that never came, footsteps in the hallway that stopped when he opened the door. His phone buzzed constantly with blocked numbers, each hanging up after one ring. He disconnected it, but the silence only made things worse. The gym had suspended him indefinitely, claiming image concerns. His only routine left was paranoia. One night he found himself driving aimlessly through the city, hoping to spot Vanessa somewhere. Instead, he found empty streets and rain washing over his windshield like time erasing every trace of what once felt real. The next morning, Evan saw her. She was sitting in a car across from the cafe he stopped at, wearing sunglasses and pretending to scroll her phone. Their eyes met briefly through the glass. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just started the car and drove off. He followed, heart pounding, until traffic separated them. He pulled over and stared at her disappearing taillights, wondering if she was checking on him or warning him to stop chasing. Either way, it was clear she was still controlling the distance between them, and he still couldn't break free. Later that day, Evan got a call from Richard. His voice was calm but sharp, asking if they could meet privately at his office. Evan agreed, telling himself this might finally be the confrontation that ends it. When he arrived, Richard greeted him with polite small talk. The man looked tired, older, almost defeated. He said he wasn't angry, just disappointed. He showed Evan photos of Vanessa with another man different from him. Richard said she'd been doing this for years, always leaving chaos behind. Evan wanted to defend her but couldn't. He finally saw the truth in front of him. Richard leaned back in his chair, explaining how Vanessa manipulated everyone around her, using secrets as weapons. He said he'd been gathering evidence for months, but someone stole his files. Evan knew exactly what he meant. The USB. Richard said he didn't care about revenge. He just wanted her gone. Then he looked at Evan and said, "You're a smart guy. Walk away." It sounded like a warning, not advice. Evan left the office with a strange mix of shame and relief. For the first time he saw Vanessa through Richard's eyes, a danger disguised as desire. When Evan reached the lobby, he saw Vanessa's car parked outside, same tinted windows. She sat inside, phone pressed to her ear, watching the building. Evan hesitated near the glass doors. He couldn't tell if she was there to meet him, or to make sure he stayed silent. He turned back once, hoping she'd step out. She didn't. The car drove off, blending into traffic. The moment left him hollow. For all the chaos she'd brought into his life, part of him still wanted her to choose him. But deep down, he knew she never would. Back at his apartment, Evan stared at the flash drive he'd hidden in his shoe. It felt heavier now, like the last piece of her he couldn't let go of. He plugged it in again, scanning through the files. Each recording was labeled by date, each one proof of corruption and manipulation. But one folder stood out, titled simply Evan. He opened it. Inside were voice clips of their conversations, screenshots of their texts, and photos he never remembered taking. It was her insurance policy, proof that he was just another part of her plan. He felt sick. He stayed up all night, trying to decide what to do. The easy choice was to destroy the drive, erase everything, and start over. But the thought of walking away felt impossible. It wasn't just guilt. It was the need to understand why. Around 5 a.m., 1 AC, he packed a small bag, deciding to leave the city for a few days. Before stepping out, he checked the hallway one last time. A newspaper lay by his door. The headline read, "Real Estate Mogul's Wife Missing." He froze, the words sinking in like truth and punishment at the same time. Evan bought a train ticket to a small coastal town. The idea of distance gave him comfort, but as the city blurred past the window, he couldn't escape the thought that she planned even this. Her disappearance wasn't a mistake. It was timing. He imagined her somewhere, watching news coverage, calculating reactions. When the train stopped halfway due to maintenance, he stared out at the rain-covered tracks, feeling like the world itself had paused to decide his fate. He wasn't running away anymore. He was being led somewhere, and he wasn't sure he'd like what waited there. Back in the city, detectives were searching Vanessa's mansion. News reports called her a missing socialite. Richard refused interviews. Evan followed every update, unable to look away. Comment sections filled with wild theories: kidnapping, suicide, scandal. But Evan knew she wasn't dead. She was too careful, too strategic. He replayed her voice message in his head, the calm tone she used when chaos was near. Somewhere out there she was setting up her next move. He just didn't know if she wanted him caught in it again or erased completely. Either way, she wasn't finished with him. Evan returned to the city after 3 days, restless and paranoid. He walked into the gym, hoping for normalcy, but the manager told him his contract was terminated. No explanation. As he left, he noticed new security cameras installed near the entrance. He looked straight into one, half expecting to see Vanessa watching from the other side. On his way home, he saw a billboard advertising Richard's company, smiling, confident, powerful. The image burned in his mind. They both had built empires on illusion, but only one of them knew how to hide behind it completely. At night, Evan sat by the window listening to the city hum. A faint ringing sound drifted in, the same tone as the gym's bell that chimed when clients entered. He stood, looking out, but the street was empty. The bell rang again, soft, distant. He closed the blinds and tried to calm himself, but the sound stayed in his head like a memory he couldn't unhear. It wasn't real, he told himself. Just stress, exhaustion, and too many nights alone. But part of him knew, Vanessa loved leaving reminders that only he would recognize. This was one of them. The following morning, he found another envelope at his door. Inside was a folded note and a small red thread. The note said, "You tied this to my wrist once." He remembered. The night she told him she wanted to feel anchored. He'd wrapped a piece of thread around her wrist as a joke, saying it was good luck. He stared at it now, realizing she'd kept it. The note didn't say where she was, or what she wanted. It only said, "It's almost over." He sat down on the floor, wondering if that was a promise or a threat. Later that week, Evan noticed the same black car parked outside again. It followed him for blocks before disappearing into traffic. He walked faster, looking over his shoulder, but no one approached. The feeling stayed long after the car was gone. When he got home, his front door was unlocked again. Nothing stolen, just rearranged. The couch slightly moved, the fridge open and the flash drive missing. He sat down hard, staring at the floor. Whatever game Vanessa was playing, she had just taken her final piece. Now he wasn't sure if she was saving him or destroying him. The next day, Evan's phone buzzed. A new number sent a single text. "We should talk." He replied, asking who it was, but no answer came. Hours later, another text appeared. "Meet me where we started." He knew what that meant. The gym. When he arrived, it was nearly empty. Lights dim, closing for renovations. He walked through the familiar halls until he reached the training area. On the floor near the dumbbells was the honey jar. It was clean, untouched, sitting like it had never been gone. He didn't move closer. He already understood what that meant. That night, Evan couldn't stop thinking about the jar. He told himself it was a trick. Maybe Richard, maybe Vanessa. But part of him wanted to believe it was a message, one last chance to understand. He replayed everything in his head. The smiles, the warnings, the promises. Somewhere between love and fear, he realized they'd become the same thing. He poured himself a drink and stared at the ceiling until dawn, wondering if people like Vanessa ever truly disappeared, or if they just changed names and kept collecting new believers. Either way, she'd left her mark. A few days later, Evan got another call from Richard. His voice was quiet this time, less confrontational. He said he wanted to meet one last time to clear the air. Evan hesitated but agreed, figuring it was safer to face the man than ignore him. They met at a high-rise office with a view of the skyline. Richard poured coffee and spoke calmly about letting go of the past. He said Vanessa was unpredictable and that men like them were easy targets for her. Then he looked at Evan, adding, "You're not the first, but you might be the last." Richard showed Evan an envelope filled with photos, Vanessa with different men across the years, always smiling, always in control. He said she collected people the way others collected trophies, then disappeared before the damage caught up. Evan couldn't look away. It was like watching his own downfall replayed with different faces. Richard said he was filing for divorce, and warned Evan to disappear before she came back. His tone wasn't threatening, it was almost sympathetic. For the first time, Evan saw that they weren't enemies. They were both casualties of the same woman's strategy. When Evan walked out of the building, the evening sun hit the glass hard enough to blur everything. Across the street, parked near a cafe, was Vanessa's car. She sat inside, hair loose, sunglasses off. She looked straight at him through the windshield and smiled. The same calm smile from their first session. No guilt, no fear, just recognition. Evan froze as the light changed, and cars honked behind him. She started the engine and drove away slowly, disappearing into the city's reflection. That smile stayed with him long after, like a ghost refusing to let him forget. Evan stood on the sidewalk long after Vanessa's car disappeared, the sound of engines fading into the city's noise. He felt hollow, like something inside him had been scooped out. For weeks he'd wanted closure, but now that she was right in front of him again, it felt worse. She wasn't hiding from anyone. She was free, untouched by the chaos she caused. Evan realized she didn't need to run because she'd already rewritten the story. The world still saw her as missing, but she was simply moving on, while he stayed frozen where she'd left him. That night, Evan returned to his apartment and poured himself a drink. He sat in the dark, trying to piece together what she wanted. If she'd come back to the city, she had a reason. He checked his phone. No new messages, just the same old photos and the silent number that used to belong to her. Every instinct told him to forget her, but curiosity always won. Somewhere deep down, he wanted her to explain why she chose him, why she made him believe in something that never existed. That unanswered question became his new obsession. Days turned into weeks. Vanessa didn't reappear, and Richard stopped calling. The news mentioned an ongoing investigation, but nothing came of it. Evan tried working again at smaller gyms, but his reputation followed him. Clients whispered, managers hesitated, and soon he was left with nothing. His savings drained fast, forcing him to move into a smaller apartment. At night he'd catch himself replaying her laugh, her voice saying his name. Every sound in his empty home echoed like she was still there. He wasn't in love anymore. He was addicted to the chaos she'd left behind. One afternoon, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a short note. Meet me where it ended. The handwriting was hers. Evan stared at it for minutes before folding it neatly into his pocket. He didn't tell anyone. He drove back to the gym building, which was now closed for renovation. The windows were boarded, the lights off. He waited in his car for hours, scanning every corner, but she never came. The only thing left was the sound of construction equipment in the distance, and a sense that he'd followed a ghost instead of a woman. He started to accept that she might be gone for good. But acceptance didn't bring peace. It only made the silence heavier. Evan began journaling, writing everything that happened from the first day she walked into the gym. He wrote about her smile, the honey jar, the drone, the red thread. Seeing it on paper made it feel both real and distant, like something that happened to someone else. He wondered if she'd ever written about him too. Maybe somewhere under a new name, she was telling her own version, one where he was the villain, not the victim. Months later, Evan found work at a small fitness studio outside the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet. The people there didn't know his past. And for the first time he could breathe without waiting for someone to call his name. Still, the peace felt strange, almost foreign. He missed the thrill, the danger, the feeling of being needed. When clients thanked him after workouts, he smiled politely but didn't feel much. He started to realize he didn't know how to live without chaos anymore. Normal life felt like silence after a storm that never ended. One rainy evening, Evan locked up the studio and walked home through the drizzle. The city lights blurred in the wet pavement, reminding him of the nights he used to wait for her outside the gym. The memory stung. He passed by a cafe window and caught his reflection. Older, worn, carrying years that hadn't passed yet. Inside, a woman laughed, her voice eerily similar to Vanessa's. For a split second, he thought it was her. When he looked closer, it wasn't. But that brief moment brought back the rush of everything he tried to forget. Some ghosts never fade. A few days later, Evan came home to find an envelope taped to his door. It wasn't handwritten this time. It was typed. Inside, a single photo, Richard lying in what looked like his study. Eyes closed, a glass of whiskey beside him. The back read, "He's gone." No signature, no date. Evan turned on the TV, flipping through news channels, but there was nothing. He sat down, staring at the picture. The image looked too clean, too perfect, like a message crafted for him alone. If Richard was truly dead, then the game wasn't over, it was beginning again. He called the police station, pretending to be a reporter, asking about Richard Harlow. The officer said only that no comment could be given. That was enough to confirm something had happened. Evan felt a chill crawl through him. He didn't know whether to feel pity, fear, or relief. He wondered where Vanessa was, and what role she played this time. She had vanished right before the storm again. He thought about the honey jar, the note, the drive, all of it leading to this. Every move she made was deliberate, and somehow he was still part of her pattern. The next morning, Evan woke to loud knocks on his door. 2 detectives stood outside, asking to come in. They said they needed to ask about his connection to Richard Harlow. He let them in, heart pounding. They asked where he was the night before, if he'd been in contact with Vanessa recently, and whether he knew anything about Richard's death. Evan denied everything. When they left, one detective handed him a card and said, "Call us if she reaches out." The emphasis on she made it clear. They already suspected who might have orchestrated the entire thing. After they left, Evan sat staring at the detective's card. He knew calling them wouldn't help. Vanessa never left traces that led back to her. Instead, she built traps that made others look guilty. He felt like he was back in her maze, walking the same loops again. That night, he opened his old notes and tried piecing together a timeline. Every lie, every meeting, every warning, it all led to this point. Somewhere between those details, he knew the truth was hiding, but every time he got close, he stopped. Maybe he didn't really want to know. Days passed, and the news finally broke. Richard Harlow was found dead in his home. Official cause, an overdose. The footage showed police cars, flashing lights, and reporters gathered outside his mansion. Evan turned off the TV, unable to watch. It felt staged, like a carefully directed ending. He wondered if Vanessa was watching the same broadcast from somewhere far away, smiling at how perfectly it played out. Everything about it felt too neat. Even death in her hands was part of a story she wrote. And once again, Evan was left reading the final chapter alone. Later that night, Evan heard soft knocks on his door. When he opened it, no one was there. But on the floor lay another envelope. Inside was a small silver key with a tag that read Locker 12. No address, no explanation. His first thought was the gym. He drove there despite the rain, parking near the back. The building was still empty, under renovation, but the side entrance was unlocked. He walked through the dark hallway until he found the lockers. Number 12 was half open. Inside, a folded paper simply read, "You're free now." It didn't feel like freedom. The next morning, the police called again, saying they had more questions. Evan hung up. He didn't want to hear his name linked to Richard's death again. Instead, he went for a long walk through the quiet streets, trying to clear his head. The smell of rain on asphalt filled the air, sharp and clean, the same as the night Vanessa first told him she wanted to start over. He realized everything with her had begun and ended in the rain. It wasn't cleansing, it was routine, a reminder that her presence always left something heavy behind. When Evan returned home, his power flickered off. The apartment went dark, the hum of electricity dying in an instant. He sat by the window, waiting for the lights to return, the street outside glowing faintly from passing cars. In the silence, he thought he heard faint footsteps in the hallway again. When the power came back, the door was slightly ajar. He checked the hallway, empty. But on the floor inside lay the same red thread tied in a small knot. He picked it up carefully, knowing it wasn't a coincidence. It was her way of saying hello. Evan's days started blending together. Sleep slipped away, replaced by endless thinking. He replayed every warning Vanessa ever gave him, wondering which ones were real. He started to believe she'd planned Richard's death months ago, maybe even before meeting him. That thought made him sick, but it also explained everything. The honey jar, the recordings, the setup. She'd needed someone to hold the blame, someone believable, and he'd volunteered without realizing. He began writing down every possible motive, as if solving it could undo it. But every explanation still ended with her. She was the center of every thread. The police visited again, but this time their tone was different. They said they had evidence linking Evan to Richard's private meetings through surveillance data from months earlier. He tried to explain he'd been helping Vanessa gather proof, but that only made things worse. They said Vanessa had filed statements before disappearing, claiming Evan was threatening her. Hearing that broke something inside him. She had erased him from her story again, turning him into the villain she needed. The detectives left with polite smiles, but their eyes said everything. They thought he was lying. And maybe now he was. Evan spent the night pacing, knowing he had to make a choice. He could hand over the flash drive copy he still had or destroy it forever. Both felt dangerous. Keeping it meant holding on to the past. Destroying it meant letting her win. He poured himself another drink and stared at the skyline through his window. Somewhere out there she was probably watching the fallout unfold, untouchable. He whispered her name once, not out of love, but defiance. Then he opened his laptop, ready to end the story on his terms, until he realized the file was already gone. The screen flashed once before shutting down. When it came back on, a single message appeared. "Let it go." Evan froze. He disconnected the Wi-Fi, pulled out the drive, but the message stayed. He leaned back, realizing she had found a way into his system again. It wasn't just about blackmail, it was control. She wanted him to stop digging, to accept the version she wrote. He unplugged the computer and sat in silence. The message still burned in his mind. Somewhere in that moment he realized she didn't want him dead. She wanted him obedient. Evan woke up hours later to pounding on the door. 2 officers stood there with a search warrant. They found traces of medication in his trash that matched Richard's overdose. He tried explaining, but they didn't listen. He spent the night at the station, questioning turning into accusation. Finally, after hours, they released him, said new evidence pointed elsewhere. As he walked out, he overheard one detective mention tampered security footage. He didn't need to ask who was behind it. Vanessa was still directing everything, even from the shadows. She was always 3 moves ahead. When Evan got home, exhaustion hit hard. He looked around at the mess papers scattered, half-empty bottles, the faint smell of honey still lingering somewhere. It was all evidence of a life hijacked by someone else's plans. He sat on the floor thinking about how easily she rewrote reality. The police, the press, even Richard, all moved like pieces she'd arranged long before the game began. He started laughing quietly, realizing she'd probably predicted this exact breakdown too. She had won without even being there, and all he could do was sit in the wreckage, trying to remember who he was. Weeks later, the news changed focus. Richard's death faded from headlines. The world moved on, but Evan didn't. He walked through the city unnoticed, just another face in the crowd. One afternoon, he saw a magazine cover at a newsstand, an article about identity theft, featuring a photo that looked like Vanessa under a different name. He bought it, reading every word. It described a woman wanted for multiple fraud cases, vanishing after each one. The last line said authorities believed she was living abroad. Evan folded the magazine, a bitter smile crossing his face. She'd done it again. That night, he walked to the edge of the city, to the river that once reflected their secret meetings. The air smelled like rain, sharp and familiar. He sat on a bench, watching lights ripple on the water. He thought about calling the police, handing over everything he knew, but what proof did he really have? She'd taken it all. What remained were memories that sounded like lies. He realized then that the truth didn't matter anymore. Vanessa's world wasn't built on truth. It was built on who could tell the better story, and she always told it better. As he sat there, his phone buzzed once. No caller ID. He answered anyway. A woman's voice whispered his name. Then the line went dead. He stayed frozen, phone pressed to his ear, waiting for it to ring again. It didn't. He checked the call log. No record of any incoming call. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe it wasn't. He looked out at the water, seeing nothing but reflection. Whether she was alive or not didn't matter anymore. She'd already embedded herself in his life so deeply that even silence could sound like her. Evan walked home through the rain, soaked but numb. The streets glistened under streetlights. The city carrying on like none of it ever happened. He unlocked his door and paused. On the kitchen counter sat a new jar of honey, identical to the first. His hands trembled as he picked it up, noticing a folded note beneath it. It read, "You're welcome." No signature. He didn't open the jar. He didn't need to. The message was clear. Vanessa was still out there, still in control and still watching. The game wasn't over. It never really had been. Evan sat at the kitchen table, staring at the new jar of honey. It looked harmless, ordinary, but his mind wouldn't let him believe that. He placed it inside a cupboard, closed the door and walked away. But even from the living room, he could feel its presence. It wasn't the jar, it was what it meant. She was alive, still in control. He wanted to throw it out, but part of him couldn't. Every reminder of her felt like proof that his story hadn't ended. And maybe, deep down, he didn't want it to. Days passed without any new signs from her. The police called once more, asking him to visit the station for a follow-up, but he ignored it. He'd learned that the closer he got to the truth, the more danger followed. Instead, he tried to rebuild a routine: early morning jogs, quick meals, quiet nights. Yet every pattern felt fragile, like it could collapse with one message from her. He told himself he was fine, but every knock at the door made him pause. Freedom didn't feel like peace. It felt like waiting for her next move. Evan applied for jobs again, avoiding gyms that required references. He found one at a wellness center, a quiet place by the coast. The owner didn't ask questions, just handed him a schedule. It felt almost normal. The ocean nearby gave him calm, the sound steady and grounding. For a few weeks, nothing strange happened. He started to believe he could live like this. No lies, no hidden messages, just work and silence. But every sunset reminded him of her perfume, her tone, her power to return whenever she wanted. He'd learned that silence could be temporary too. One afternoon, a journalist visited the wellness center asking about a former trainer involved in the Harlow case. Evan froze. He denied being that person, but the reporter smiled knowingly and left a card. That night, curiosity won again. He called the number. The journalist said there were new details. Vanessa spotted overseas, living under another name. Evan said nothing. The reporter offered money for information, but Evan hung up. He didn't want fame or justice. He wanted quiet. But hearing she was alive reignited something inside him, a spark that refused to die no matter how much he tried. He spent that night walking along the beach, thinking about the first time he saw Vanessa smile. It had felt like sunlight through glass. Bright, distant, unreachable. Now it was a memory that burned. He imagined her somewhere far away, sitting in another cafe, charming another man into a story like his. It made him angry, but also strangely relieved. If she was alive, it meant he hadn't dreamed at all. Maybe he'd been part of something bigger, a story that never really ended, just kept moving from one believer to the next. He pitied whoever came after him. Weeks later, Evan got another letter. This one wasn't typed. It was handwritten. The familiar loops and curls of her handwriting made his hands shake. It read, "You did well. Don't ruin it." There was no return address, no clue where it came from. He burned the note immediately, but the smell of smoke filled the apartment for hours. That night, he dreamed of her again. Not as she was, but as she wanted him to remember. Smiling, flawless, untouchable. He woke up sweating, realizing he wasn't dreaming of her out of love anymore. He was dreaming out of fear. The journalist called again, saying they had proof Vanessa was in Europe, using a new identity tied to real estate fraud. Evan didn't respond. He deleted the voicemail, but the idea kept haunting him. If she was still active, it meant she was untouchable. He started wondering if the honey jar had been her final warning or a test to see if he'd obey. The more he thought about it, the more paranoid he became. Every shadow outside his window looked like surveillance. Every unknown number felt like her checking to see if he'd learned his lesson. Evan's mental state began to spiral. He skipped work, stopped answering calls, and barely ate. He spent hours watching the sea through his window, convinced someone was out there. The line between reality and memory blurred. He imagined her voice whispering directions again, calm and patient. When a package arrived one morning, he didn't open it. It sat on the counter, waiting. For 3 days he ignored it. On the 4th he opened it carefully. Inside was a newspaper clipping about Richard's death with one sentence underlined: "Police reopen the case after evidence reappears." The handwriting was unmistakable. Hers. The article mentioned new footage showing a woman entering Richard's home the night he died. The image was grainy, but it looked like Vanessa. The report said the woman's face was obscured, leaving the investigation unresolved. Evan knew what this meant. She was letting him know she was still pulling strings. She'd resurfaced just long enough to remind everyone, including him, that she couldn't be erased. He folded the paper and put it away, deciding not to think about it anymore. But deep down, he knew that no matter how far she ran, her trail always led back to him. A few days later, a detective visited Evan again. He said new evidence had cleared Evan's name completely. Someone had tampered with the original footage, shifting the timestamps. The detective said they were focusing on a female suspect connected to multiple fraud cases. Evan listened quietly, nodding, pretending to be surprised. When they left, he sat on the couch for hours, staring at the window. The world believed he was innocent now, but he didn't feel it. He'd been part of something dirty, something that couldn't be washed off. Innocence didn't mean peace. It just meant survival. News stations ran segments about Vanessa's disappearance. Photos of her flashed across the screen, some real, some digitally enhanced. They called her the Widow of Deceit. Evan couldn't help but laugh bitterly at the nickname. Every headline made her sound like a myth, not a person. People debated her story online like she was entertainment. None of them knew what it was like to be inside her storm, to be her chosen pawn. He turned off the TV, realizing that maybe this was exactly how she wanted to be remembered. Not caught, but immortalized. The journalist from before reached out again, offering Evan a chance to tell his side. They wanted to publish his story. Every detail, every secret. They said it would clear his image, make him human again. He refused. He didn't want to be famous for surviving her. He wanted to disappear. When the journalist insisted, he simply said, "She'll find me if I talk." The line went quiet. They didn't call again. Evan knew better now. Vanessa didn't punish people for betrayal, she erased them. Silence had become his only safety, and even that felt temporary. One night, While scrolling online, Evan saw a post from a small European spa page. The image showed a familiar woman leading a yoga session. The caption read, "Meet our new trainer Clara." He zoomed in. It was her. Same eyes, same smile, different name. She'd done it again, rebuilding from the ashes like nothing happened. He stared at the photo for a long time, memorizing every detail. She looked calm, happy even. He thought about reporting it, but stopped. What was the point? She always won. She always started over. It was her version of survival. Evan considered flying there, confronting her face to face. The idea lingered in his head for days. He even looked up flights and hotels, imagining what he'd say if he saw her again. But every scenario ended the same, her smiling while he lost control. He realized she'd already taken enough of his life. Finding her would only give her more. So he closed his laptop and walked to the balcony. The air was cool, calm. For the first time he whispered to himself that she didn't own him anymore. The words felt weak, but they were a start. The next morning, Evan received an email with no subject line. The sender's name was blank. Attached was a single photo, him standing at his window the night before looking out at the sea. The angle was from across the street. His heart sank. He checked the street below but saw nothing. Whoever took it had been close enough to remind him he was never really free. He deleted the email but couldn't erase the thought. She'd found him again. Maybe she'd never lost track of him at all. Maybe freedom was just another illusion she gave him. Evan spent that entire day indoors, blinds drawn. Every sound outside made him tense. He wondered if she'd moved into the same town, if she was already living nearby under another name. That night, he opened a bottle of wine and sat by the window again, forcing himself to look out. The street was quiet, peaceful. For a brief moment, he convinced himself he'd imagined everything. Then a car parked across the road. The headlights turned off but no one stepped out. He watched for an hour until it drove away. Sleep didn't come that night either. Weeks went by without another sign. Evan tried focusing on work again, avoiding social media, avoiding people. He stopped checking news entirely. The silence was uncomfortable but tolerable. Then one afternoon, his manager handed him a letter left at the front desk. It had no stamp, no sender, just his name. Inside was a single line written in neat cursive. "I told you we'd both survive." There was a faint scent of her perfume on the paper. He didn't show it to anyone. He simply folded it and put it in his pocket, unsure if it was comfort or curse. That night Evan sat on the beach until the sky turned dark. He listened to the waves crash and wondered if she was watching somewhere nearby. Maybe she was close enough to see him. Maybe not. It didn't matter. For the first time he didn't feel afraid. The fear had turned into acceptance. She would always exist in his world somehow. Through a scent, a letter, a shadow. But he didn't have to chase her anymore. He stood up, brushed the sand off his shoes and walked home, carrying the quiet knowledge that survival sometimes meant surrender. Months passed and Evan's life began to resemble something normal again. He worked, slept, and ate without thinking of her every hour. But occasionally, something small would pull him back. A certain perfume, the glint of gold jewelry. A laugh from a stranger that sounded like hers. Each time his chest tightened briefly, then loosened again. The memories weren't gone. They just changed shape. They no longer controlled him. They just reminded him of the person he used to be. Maybe that was enough. Maybe healing wasn't forgetting. It was learning to live with what couldn't be undone. Then one morning, a news headline caught his attention. Interpol traces international con artist. The article showed a woman's photo, Vanessa under yet another name. Authorities claimed she'd fled again after defrauding investors. The story called her the woman with 1,000 names. Evan read every word, realizing how predictable she'd become. She wasn't chasing money anymore. She was chasing power. He closed the article and smiled faintly. Somewhere she'd see her name trending and feel proud. Maybe that was her only goal all along, to be remembered, no matter the cost. And in that way she succeeded. That evening, Evan received a message from the same journalist. They said Vanessa's new victims wanted to find her, that his insight could help stop her for good. He stared at the message for a long time. Helping them meant opening old wounds. Ignoring them meant letting her keep winning. After hours of indecision, he replied with 2 words: "I'll help." For the first time, it wasn't about revenge or closure. It was about ending the story for others before it began. Maybe he couldn't undo his mistakes, but he could stop someone else from repeating them. Working with the journalist brought a strange kind of peace. Evan told them everything, from the honey jar to the fake documents. He didn't hold back this time. The journalist promised to protect his identity and expose her methods. As they gathered evidence, Evan realized how systematic she'd been. Every target followed a pattern. Every relationship designed to collapse neatly into her next escape. Seeing it laid out made him feel both foolish and free. He wasn't her first or her last, but he was the one who finally broke the silence she depended on. That thought kept him steady. Weeks later, the journalist published the story. It went viral instantly, thousands sharing, debating, analyzing. They called her the perfect predator. The article never mentioned Evan's name, but people speculated endlessly about her final victim. He stayed offline, avoiding the noise. For the first time, it didn't matter what people thought. The truth was out. He watched from a distance as authorities reopened investigations worldwide. It wasn't victory exactly, but it felt like balance. She had thrived on silence, and now the world was talking. That was enough. He'd finally given her something she couldn't control: exposure. Evan knew the story's reach would find her eventually. He imagined her reading it somewhere, smiling, unbothered, already planning her next move. But something inside him had shifted. He didn't care anymore. He'd stopped living in her narrative. Every breath that followed felt lighter. Every morning a little clearer. For years she'd written his ending for him. Now, for the first time, he had the pen. The scars she left weren't gone, but they had purpose. They reminded him that even the most charming people could be cages in disguise, and that he'd finally stepped outside of his. One quiet evening, Evan walked past a small cafe near the beach. Through the window, he saw a woman sitting alone, reading the newspaper. Her hair, her posture, it was her. Or maybe it wasn't. He didn't stop to check. He just kept walking, the ocean wind at his back. For the first time in years, he didn't need to know the truth. Whether she was alive, hiding, or haunting, didn't matter anymore. She could keep her secrets. He had his peace, and that, he realized, was the one thing she could never take from him. Weeks passed after the article's release. The world slowly lost interest in Vanessa's story, moving on to newer scandals. But for Evan, the silence that followed felt different this time. It wasn't fear, it was relief. He began teaching again at a small community gym, the kind that smelled like hard work and old iron. His clients didn't know his past, and he didn't offer it. He focused on helping others rebuild strength. Something he finally understood wasn't just physical. He'd spent years trying to escape her, but what he really needed was to find himself again. He kept a journal now, not of her but of his own progress. Each page was simple. Meals, workouts, reflections. Writing gave him clarity. One night he read back through the early entries filled with anger and obsession, realizing how far he'd come. Vanessa had once defined his life, but now she was just a story written in past tense. He didn't hate her anymore. He pitied her, a person too addicted to reinvention to ever be real. Forgiving her didn't make her actions right. It just stopped her from owning any more of his mind. That was freedom. Evan began volunteering at a youth center nearby, helping troubled teenagers find focus through exercise. Their energy reminded him of himself before everything went wrong. Hopeful, naive, desperate to be seen. One boy asked if he'd ever been betrayed before. Evan paused before saying yes, but instead of explaining, he said the lesson was learning to stop waiting for apologies that would never come. The boy nodded, not fully understanding, but the moment stayed with Evan. Teaching them gave him purpose again. It wasn't about erasing the past anymore. It was about using it for something good. Sometimes he still dreamed of her. In those dreams she wasn't a monster or a lover, just a face fading into fog. He would wake up calm, no longer haunted by her voice. It felt like his mind was slowly rewriting the story too, making her smaller, less powerful. One morning he stood at the mirror and noticed he looked different. Older, yes, but steadier. The man staring back wasn't the same trainer who fell for a client's lies. He'd made peace with his reflection, something he hadn't done in years. And that realization felt like a quiet victory. The journalist called again, thanking him for his help. They said Vanessa had vanished once more after a brief sighting in Spain. Evan only replied with, "She always does." He didn't ask for updates. He didn't need to know where she went. As he hung up, he realized she would always be out there somewhere, rewriting her identity for someone new. But this time, she couldn't use his name or his story to do it. He wasn't her secret anymore. He was a closed chapter, one she couldn't reopen no matter how many new aliases she created. One evening, while locking up the gym, Evan found an envelope on the counter. No name, no handwriting, just a single folded paper inside. It read, "Thank you for keeping my secret." He froze, unsure if it was from her, or someone playing a cruel joke. He looked around, but the street outside was empty. The letter didn't scare him this time. It only confirmed what he already knew. Vanessa was still watching, still curious. But unlike before, he didn't feel trapped. He smiled faintly, tossed the letter in the trash, and turned off the lights. Some stories didn't deserve replays. Evan started focusing on his clients again. The gym became his world, simple, predictable, and honest. Each repetition, each drop of sweat reminded him of control. He no longer looked over his shoulder, no longer searched crowds for her face. She had become just another shadow from a life that no longer fit him. One afternoon, as he watched a young woman complete her first full workout, he felt pride, pure and uncomplicated. For once, he wasn't chasing anyone or anything. He was simply present, living quietly in a world that finally felt safe enough to stay in. Outside, the city had changed. New buildings rose where old ones fell, and the gym where he first met Vanessa had reopened under a different name. He walked past it one morning out of curiosity. Through the glass he saw strangers training where they once stood together. No trace of her, no reminder of what happened. Just fresh paint, bright lights, and laughter. It struck him how easily places moved on. He smiled softly, realizing he could too. The past wasn't gone, it was just no longer waiting for him inside those walls. And that was enough. Later that week, Evan took a day off and visited the cemetery where Richard had been buried. The grave was simple, marked only by his name and the dates. Evan stood quietly, unsure why he came. Maybe for closure, maybe to say what couldn't be said before. He whispered an apology. Not for what happened, but for letting it go too far. He placed a single red thread on the headstone, the same kind he'd once tied around Vanessa's wrist. Then he turned and walked away, leaving behind the last symbol of everything that once controlled him. At home he cleaned out a drawer filled with old notes, photos, and reminders of her. Each item had once carried meaning, a message, a thrill, a lie. Now they were just clutter. He packed them into a box, taped it shut, and placed it in the building's dumpster. Watching it disappear felt like removing a weight from his chest. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about accepting the ending. The box hit the metal with a dull thud, and for the first time he didn't look back. The story was finally where it belonged, in the past. In the months that followed, Evan built something close to a normal life. He rented a small place near the beach, filled with sunlight and quiet mornings. He started painting as a hobby, finding comfort in colors that didn't ask for meaning. Every so often he'd think about Vanessa, not with anger but curiosity. What kind of emptiness drove someone to live like that? He never found the answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Some people were just built to run. He'd stopped chasing, and that was his answer. Peace didn't need reasons, it just needed choice. One afternoon, Evan received a postcard in the mail. It was from Italy, showing a calm countryside villa. The back had only one line: "Hope you're well." No name, no address. He turned it over, smiling faintly. Maybe it was her, maybe not. Either way, it didn't matter. He placed the card on his bookshelf next to a small jar of real honey he'd bought himself, a quiet symbol that sweetness could come without poison. He no longer needed her version of love. He had rebuilt his own, slow and steady, one honest day at a time. Evan began mentoring new trainers at the center, teaching them not just technique but awareness. He told them that trust was a currency, valuable, fragile, and too often exploited. They didn't know his story, but they listened closely, sensing the truth behind his words. When one of them asked what the hardest part of his career had been, he answered simply, "Remembering who I was when things got loud." It became his quiet mantra. For the first time, his past wasn't a burden. It was wisdom, reshaped by perspective and time. Something he could finally live with. On quiet evenings, Evan still walked by the water, the same way he did when everything fell apart. But the walks felt different now, lighter. He'd stopped looking for ghosts and started noticing small things again: the sound of waves, the way the wind shifted, the smell of salt in the air. It reminded him that peace wasn't something you found, it was something you built, piece by piece. He'd done that. There was still loneliness sometimes, but it didn't hurt anymore. It just reminded him that freedom always costs something, and he'd finally paid in full. One night, while locking the gym, he noticed a woman standing by the door. She smiled politely and said she wanted to join. Her voice was kind, her eyes steady. For a brief second, the memory of Vanessa flickered through him, but it passed. He signed her up, gave her a schedule, and wished her good luck. When she left, he laughed softly at himself for the reflex. He wasn't that man anymore, the one who mistook charm for truth. He'd learned to see people for who they were, not who they made him want to believe. Months later, the journalist reached out one last time. They said authorities had confirmed Vanessa's death in a small coastal accident overseas. Evan didn't react at first. The words felt unreal, like another one of her tricks. He thanked them for the information and ended the call. That night he sat by the ocean again, thinking about the woman who changed his life. Whether she truly died or not didn't matter. She had already lived too many lives to be pinned down by one ending. Maybe this was just her final vanishing act, perfectly executed. As waves crashed softly against the rocks, Evan closed his eyes. He pictured her face, not the way she looked in photos or memories, but as a shape fading into distance. He whispered a quiet goodbye, not expecting anyone to hear. The wind carried the words away like dust. For the first time, it didn't feel tragic. It felt final. Whatever part of him she once owned was gone now. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of closure. He smiled, small but genuine, and let the sea erase the last of her from his thoughts. Evan went home and placed his keys on the counter beside the honey jar. The apartment was still, warm with evening light. He made tea, opened the window, and let the air in. Everything felt calm, ordinary, unremarkable, and that was beautiful. Life didn't need intensity to feel meaningful anymore. It just needed honesty. The chaos was over. He'd spent years chasing answers, but the truth had always been simple: love without trust is just control in disguise. And once you see that, you never let it back in. He'd finally learned what real freedom meant. That night, he dreamed of the gym again. Bright lights, empty mirrors, no voices. He walked between rows of treadmills until he saw the honey jar sitting on the counter. But this time, it wasn't a warning or a trap. It was just a symbol, harmless, almost peaceful. When he woke, he didn't feel fear. He just smiled at how his mind had rewritten even the nightmares. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant taking control of how the story stayed in you. Vanessa had been a chapter now. She was just a lesson. And lessons can't hurt you anymore. In the months that followed, Evan's life stayed quiet. He built small routines: coffee at sunrise, reading by the window, walking home under streetlights. People came and went, but nothing dramatic happened. And that was the point. For the first time, stability felt exciting. He found joy in the smallest things, like helping a client reach a goal or watching waves shift color at dusk. Life no longer needed meaning carved from chaos. It was enough just to live it. The storm that once defined him had passed, leaving behind a cleaner, steadier kind of peace. On the anniversary of Vanessa's disappearance, Evan received a package with no label. Inside was a small framed photo of the beach near his new home. On the back, written in faint ink, were the words, "Peace looks good on you." He sat quietly for a while, unsure if it was real or imagined. Maybe someone had sent it as a kind gesture. Maybe it was her, reaching out one last time. Either way, he didn't feel fear. He placed it on his desk beside his journal. Even if it was her, it meant she saw him at peace. Evan began writing again. Not about Vanessa, but about resilience. His journal turned into pages of reflection, about choices, trust, and rebuilding. He didn't plan to publish it, but he wrote like he was talking to someone who might need it one day. Maybe another person would fall for a voice like hers, and his story could remind them what survival really means. He wrote simply, honestly, without bitterness. Each sentence felt like closing a door gently, not slamming it shut. He was no longer her story. He was his own, finally, and that made all the difference. One evening, while walking by the water, Evan saw a red thread tangled around a piece of driftwood. He picked it up, rolling it between his fingers before tossing it back into the sea. He smiled as it floated away, carried by the waves. It wasn't a message or omen, just coincidence. Still, it felt symbolic. He'd once tied that same color around someone's wrist, believing it meant connection. Now it meant release. The sea kept moving, and so did he. Life didn't need to be rewritten anymore. It just needed to be lived. One moment at a time. Years later, people barely remembered the scandal. New faces filled the news. New stories replaced the old ones. Evan's name faded from memory. And that was exactly how he wanted it. He grew older quietly. His days simple but full. Sometimes clients would ask about his past, and he'd smile, saying he'd learned that truth and control never mix. He didn't mention names or details. He didn't need to. His peace came from what wasn't said. The silence between the chaos, the quiet life after the storm. And that silence at last belonged completely to him. On a calm morning, Evan opened the gym early, sunlight streaming through clean glass. He watched people arrive, smiling, talking, full of life. He greeted them warmly, his voice steady, his heart light. The jar of honey sat on his desk, now filled with sugar packets, ordinary and harmless. As he wiped the counter, he looked out the window at the ocean beyond and smiled. The past was still there, but it no longer defined him. He had rebuilt from the ruins she left, stronger and whole. The story was over, and this time the ending was his.